Pages from a notebook found inside a house in the woods by Brian Keene. In hindsight, it was probably a dumb idea, but it didn't seem like it when John was explaining it to us. Robbing a bank was a fool's errand, he said. What with all the security technology they have now, sticking up a supermarket or store was also stupid. Too hard to keep the crowd controlled. Too many people shopping with plastic rather than cash. And too many chances of some well-meaning civilian wanting to play hero. John said instead, we should pull a heist at the comic book convention. Not that big event in San Diego, but a small regional con right here in rural central Pennsylvania. So that's what we did. Me, John, Tiny, Phil, and Marco. We went in disguise. Later, if the witnesses described us, they would have said the four perpetrators were two superheroes, an alien and a clown. Tiny stayed out in the car, so he didn't wear a costume. We walked up to the registration area, displayed our guns, which the other attendees had mistaken for props, took all the cash. The girls behind the counter, their name tags read Karen and Alicia, seemed to have trouble believing it was happening. Karen kept saying over and over, but this is a comic book convention. We got a nice haul, and we didn't have to kill anybody. The killing began soon after, and we weren't the ones who started it. I'm not a bad guy. Well, okay, maybe I'm a bad guy, but I'm not a bad man. I've got a wife and a kid, Cherie and Pete Jr. He's only 2 years old, and folks says he looks like me, but I don't think that's true. He's got his mother's same big, beautiful brown eyes. You do what you have to do to provide for your family. Some people go to work at the Harley-Davidson plant. Some work at the paper mill. Others go to an office or some sales job to feed their family. Me, I'm a stick-up man. Never hurt anybody. I'm not some shithead mugger, robbing people of whatever's in their wallet. I've only ever stolen from big places, the type of joints that have insurance to financially protect against people like me. I miss Cherie and Pete Jr. I hope they're okay. I hope things are different where they are. Then I go upstairs and look out the window at all those... Anyway, robbing the convention was smooth and easy. Things didn't start falling apart until we got outside. We heard police sirens, and I remember thinking it sounded like they were racing in different directions, rather than converging on our location. We heard some ambulance sirens too. Yes, they sound different. Folks like you probably can't tell the difference, but in my line of work, I need to. Thinking back on it now, the cops never did roll up on us. That wasn't the problem I mentioned. No, what went wrong was Tiny. We'd been so intent on planning and surveillance and mapping getaway routes, we hadn't bothered to make sure Tiny checked the car. That was his job. His one fucking job. Get us a car with valid tags, registration, and inspection sticker. Make sure the headlights and brake lights worked. Make sure there was absolutely nothing about the car that could get us pulled over by some cop out to make his ticket quota. Tiny did all those things, and he did them well because we told him to. It never occurred to us we'd have to remind Tiny to gas up the fucking fuel tank as well. We ran out of gas 4 blocks away from the Holiday Inn where the convention was taking place, near the outskirts of town. was lots of cursing and name-calling and threats, but in the end, we just sort of accepted our situation with grim resignation. Marco tried to carjack a passing station wagon, but the driver merely gaped at the sight of a clown waving a gun at him, swerved around Marco, and sped away. John shouldered the backpack with the money and led us down an alley and along some railroad tracks. He cursed Tiny a few more times. Phil echoed him, punctuating John's swearing with some profanity of his own. Marco cursed the driver of the station wagon. I stayed quiet, figuring I'd save my breath in case we had to run. Tiny stayed quiet too. I think that's because he was embarrassed and frustrated with himself and tried very hard not to cry in front of us. We heard more sirens. And at one point, somebody shrieked. But the sound was far away and had nothing to do with us. More troublesome were the occasional gunshots, echoing from different directions. What the fuck is going on? Phil muttered. That can't be it for us. Maybe we're at war, Tiny suggested. We reached an abandoned factory. Something as common in Pennsylvania as trees or convenience stores. Ditched our costumes. I was grateful to take off the mask. My face was covered in sweat. My glasses kept fogging up where I'd worn it. The area around the factory smelled rancid. I assumed that there must be a dead animal nearby, maybe down on the train tracks or something. I didn't bring it up with the others, but I noticed Tiny and Phil cringing at the stench. We dropped our disguises into an old 55-gallon drum of waste oil and debated what to do next. That's when we saw the first dead guy. Chain link fence rattled to our left. We all turned. The fence surrounded the factory's parking lot. The asphalt was cracked and pitted. Limp brown weeds thrust up from the fissures. The fence itself was rusty and sagged in some places. The dead guy slumped against it. How do we know he was dead? Well, the best indicator was the fact that his fucking throat had been slit from ear to ear. Blood caked the guy's shirt and pants. The wound wasn't clear and neat. Not the kind of cut a razor would make. This looked more like somebody had been at him with a hacksaw. The cut looked kind of like a smiley face, as if he had a second mouth beneath his chin, and was grinning at us with it. I'd heard rumors that the cartels were moving into our area and wondered briefly if it was related to that. But then I focused on the more important matter at hand. Namely, how the hell that guy was up and walking around despite his condition. He stared at us, unblinking. I think his eyes were more unnerving than his injury. It was his eyes that cemented it for me. This guy was dead. Nothing living has eyes like that, except for maybe a shark. The fence rattled again as he lurched toward us on his wobbly legs. His movements were disjointed. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I saw something move deep inside his wound. Vocal cords, maybe, I don't know. It bothers me to think about it. Surprisingly, we didn't run. I don't know why. I can't speak for the others, but in my case, it just didn't occur to me. I stood there staring at him the way you slow down to gawk at a car crash until he was almost upon us. I don't even remember feeling afraid or in danger. Instead, I was noticing things about him, like how he smelled. It had been him rather than a dead animal. That I'd noticed upon our arrival. The color, texture of his skin, like light gray cheesecloth. Mostly those eyes. He was dead, but there was still emotion in them. Hunger. Phil pulled his pistol while the rest of us stood gaping. "Don't come any closer, asshole," he warned. The dead guy's mouth worked pitifully. lips smashing together. Still no sound came out. "I mean it," Phil said, stepping closer. When the dead guy didn't stop, Phil strode up to him and shoved the barrel of his pistol against the man's chest. The dead guy lunged, wrapping his arms around Phil's neck. Shouting, Phil squeezed his trigger. The shot was muffled by the dead man's body. Then Phil fired 2 more rounds. The dead guy stumbled and jittered as the bullets tore through him. For a second, I thought he'd lose his grip on Phil, but instead, his head darted forward. He clamped his teeth down on Phil's neck. Phil screamed, and then the rest of us joined him. The dead man jerked his head back. A piece of Phil's skin dangled from his mouth. Blood bubbled from the wound, then sprayed as if someone had turned on a garden hose inside of Phil. Still shrieking, Phil dropped his gun and beat at his attacker. The dead man chewed his prize and stumbled backward. He grasped at Phil, those dead eyes focused in on the pumping blood. Phil dropped to his knees, hands clasping his wound, trying desperately to staunch the blood flow. He opened his mouth to plead with us, and blood just bubbled out. John and Marco opened fire, drilling the dead man. This time the shots weren't muffled. My ears rang from the sound. Empty shell casings pinched on the dirt and asphalt. Dead guy twitched and stumbled, but then plodded forward again, reaching for Phil. He didn't stop until one of them shot him in the head. Then he dropped, as if a switch had been turned off. I ran over to Phil, knelt beside him, searching for a pulse, while Marco prodded the attacker with the toe of his shoe. I felt a hand on my shoulder and almost screamed again. Then I realized it was John, crouching down behind me. Is he? I don't know. It's hard to feel anything beneath all this blood. John clutched Phil's wrist and checked for a pulse there, while I slid my fingers along the uninjured side of his throat. Nothing, he reported. Shook my head. "We gotta do that CPR shit," Tiny urged. "Maybe we can keep him alive long enough to get him to a hospital." John stuffed his gun into his waistband and hissed because the barrel was still hot. He jerked it out again. "We gotta do something," Tiny repeated. "He's dead, Tiny," I said. "Nothing we can do." "We need to get out of here," John said. "I guarantee somebody heard all that shooting." Marco nodded. "Let's jet." He and John headed for the train tracks. I hesitated, cast one glance back at Phil's corpse, and then trotted off after him. "Come on, Tiny," I said. "They're right. Only thing we can do for Phil now is not get caught." We just started down the embankment when Phil got up again. He groaned and shook, moved like a toddler just learning how to walk. For a moment I wondered if we'd been wrong. Maybe he hadn't been dead. And then I noticed 2 things. His wound had stopped bleeding, and his eyes. This time it was me who pulled his gun first, taking a lesson from what had finally dropped the first living dead man. I aimed for Phil's head. The first bullet tore out what was left of his throat. He stumbled forward, moaning. My second shot hit him above the left eye. Part of his brains splattered out behind him, steaming on the asphalt. And with that, Phil died again. And then we ran, following the railroad tracks into the woods. By the time we stumbled across this house, we'd picked up quite a following of dead people. They loped along behind us, slowly rotting with each step, shedding body parts and organs as easily as you or I shed our clothes. Luckily, they couldn't run, so we were able to stay ahead of them. The only thing we couldn't outrun was their stench. Not all of them stank, mind you, at least not the fresh ones. The ones who had apparently been dead for a few days, they were like walking roadkill. It didn't help matters that it was the height of summer. The heat and humidity only added to the reek. With no breeze blowing, the stink sort of sat in the air like a mist. Just as it had with Phil and his attacker, the only thing that seemed to work against the dead was damage to their brains. We saw corpses missing arms and legs, disemboweled or suffering horrific injuries, but they kept on coming. At first, we wasted a lot of bullets trying to pick off our pursuers. Shooting someone in the head from a distance and with a pistol looks easy on television, but it's much harder in real life. Worse, the gunshots attracted more of the fuckers, so eventually we just focused on evading them. I won't spend time describing the house. If you're reading this, then you already know what it looks like. Just another crumbling farmhouse abandoned out in the middle of the woods, like so many other rural properties in this part of the country. Unlike that collapsed chicken coop outside, or the barn that's leaning heavily to one side, the house was in surprisingly good shape. No broken windows or holes in the roof. We thought it might be occupied since the doors were unlocked, but once we got inside and saw the dust and cobwebs for ourselves, we knew it had been a long time since anyone had lived here. We swept old musty books onto the floor and shoved the dust-laden shelves in front of the windows, pushed a moldering couch against the front door after locking the deadbolt. We blocked the kitchen door with a refrigerator and then barricaded all the other windows and the floor. Then, for the first time since entering the comic book convention, we had a moment to breathe and collect ourselves. Eventually the dead found us. We didn't have to see them to know they had arrived. Their smell and sounds gave them away. Those first few hours were nerve-wracking, groaning and hissing. The corpses banged on the walls and windows and fumbled at the door, but our fortifications held. After a while, we relaxed enough to explore the rest of the house. Tiny was sent to guard the back door, and Marco stood watch in the living room, while John and I took inventory. The electricity was out. There was plenty of canned food and dry goods in the cupboard. We found 6 cases of bottled spring water downstairs, along with 2 cases of soda. We wouldn't starve right away, and as long as we conserved, we could make the water last a bit. Oddly, the previous tenants had apparently left in a hurry, leaving their belongings behind. Framed family photographs still hung on the walls, and keepsakes and mementos lined shelves and crannies. All their clothing still hung in the closets, musty, mildewed, but otherwise in decent shape. The food in the refrigerator had long since rotted, as we discovered when moving it to form the barricade. And the dirty dishes left behind in the sink were almost as revolting as the things outside. They'd even left their guns behind. We found a beautiful wooden gun case on the second floor with ornate glass doors and a storage shelf beneath. Inside were 2 deer rifles, a shotgun, and a pistol. John took a rifle, I kept the shotgun, and we gave the other weapons to Tiny and Marco. I won't lie. Somehow just holding that shotgun made me feel better about our situation in ways my handgun didn't. Unfortunately, that feeling didn't last very long. Tiny saw the woman first. We slept in shifts, 2 of us on guard downstairs while the other 2 bedded down upstairs. John and I were on watch sometime around 2 in the morning. The dead were still clamoring outside. I'd found a jar of instant coffee in the kitchen and was just about to stir the crystals into a bottle of water when Tiny started screaming. John and I both ran upstairs. We nearly collided with Marco emerging from his bedroom, bleary-eyed and confused. Tiny was sitting up on the bed, staring at us with wide-eyed panic, babbling nonsensically. When he finally calmed down, he told us that he'd felt somebody sit down on the bed. He even heard the box spring squeak, as if a weight had been placed on it. When he sat up, he saw a depression on the mattress, as if somebody were sitting there, but there was nobody else in the room. Then the springs squeaked again, and the depression disappeared. Footsteps sounded slowly across the floor. As Tiny watched, a woman appeared. She opened the door, glanced back at him with what he called terrible eyes, and then vanished. All three of us chalked it up to a bad dream. Tiny insisted it wasn't. He said he couldn't sleep and offered to switch with me. Tired as I was, I accepted. The guys left my bedroom door open. Marco went back to sleep, and John and Tiny headed downstairs. Sighing, I lay down in the bed with my clothes still on. I was so exhausted I barely remembered to take off my shoes. The pillow, despite its musty odor, felt like heaven. Then my bedroom door slammed, hard enough to rattle the hinges, and I bolted upright in bed, instantly awake again. I heard Marco curse on the other side of the wall, and John and Tiny shouting queries from below. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Throughout the next day, we were all presented with evidence that what Tiny had seen was, in fact, not a bad dream. Doors and cupboards opened and closed at random. Footsteps echoed throughout the house. Something knocked repeatedly on the coffee table. Spigots on the kitchen sink turned on by themselves. We felt like we were being watched all the time. On the third day, Marco saw the woman. She appeared at the top of the stairs and vanished about halfway down. He looked at the portraits on the wall and pointed to a woman in several of them, insisting it was her. Tiny confirmed it was the same woman he'd seen too. That night, something pushed Marco down the stairs. At least I'm assuming he was pushed. Marco was a big guy, but despite his formidable size, he was never clumsy. He was on his way to the second floor, intent on looking out the windows and seeing how many dead people were outside. We suspected, judging by their clamor, that reinforcements had arrived, perhaps attracted by the noise from others. I remember watching him ascend. John made some wisecrack, and Marco glanced back at him, his mouth forming a reply, and then wham! He flew backward, feet leaving the stairs, and tumbled to the bottom. Like I said, it looked like he was pushed. Marco was never able to verify for us what had happened because he broke his neck in the fall and was dead by the time we reached him. He got back up a few minutes later, moaning just like the rest of those rotten fucks outside. John put him down again. The sound of the gunshot seemed to stir up the dead. None of us slept. We sat huddled together in the living room, desperately trying to come up with a plan. By morning, John had decided to go for help. Tiny and I weren't crazy about the plan. We didn't like the idea of being left alone in the house with this, well, let's call it what it is, a ghost. We definitely didn't want to open the door even for a second and risk letting the hordes inside. But John, just like always, convinced us. He talked us into it just like he talked us into the heist. He even said he'd leave the money from the heist with us. The plan was he'd sneak out the front door. Tiny would distract the dead, rattling a window to draw them away from the door. We'd open it only for a second, giving John just enough time to get out. Then we'd bolt it shut again, slide the couch back in place. He figured he could outrun the corpses and lose them once he got into the woods. Then he'd find help. But just like it had after the robbery, things quickly went to shit. We couldn't get the door open. Tiny did a great job of creating a disturbance and distracting the dead, but the damn door wouldn't budge. The deadbolt turned. When I pulled the doorknob, nothing happened. John tried it next, and then both of us, but no luck. Then as we watched, the deadbolt slid slowly back into place. She doesn't want to let us out, I whispered. Fuck that, John raised his voice. You hear that, bitch? Fuck you and your house. He dashed upstairs. Tiny and I ran after him. When the windows wouldn't open, John smashed one of them out with the butt of his rifle. before we could stop him, he clambered out onto the roof and climbed over the side, dangling from the gutter. Then he let go and dropped to the ground. For a few harrowing seconds, we could see them. Then he appeared, weaving and dodging the dead like a football player going for the touchdown. The opposing team sacked him a few yards later and howled as they tore him apart. He was far enough away that it's hard to know for sure, but I think I saw his mouth and eyes moving after they'd eaten the rest of him. And his head is still there, even as I write this. What if the dead are aware? What if part of John is still conscious inside that decapitated head? The next day, we found all of our water bottles poured out on the kitchen floor. Tiny and I vowed not to sleep, but I did anyway, slumped against the wall. It was the shotgun blast that woke me up. I don't know if he killed himself, or if the ghost did it for him. At least the blast took off most of his head, so I didn't have to worry about him coming back to eat me. Now it's just me and the dead. The dead outside, the dead in here with me. I'm beyond scared, beyond panicked. At this point I'm just numb. Can't sleep. Thirsty. Cherie and I used to go to the movies a lot before Pete Jr. was born. I remember this one time we saw this haunted house flick. On the way home, Cherie asked why the people inside the house didn't just leave. It's a good question. Now I know why. They didn't leave because the ghost wouldn't let them. I've tried a couple times since Tiny killed himself, and the ghost won't let me open the door. The corpses outside are restless. And me? I'm just sitting here watching the door, waiting to see if it opens by itself. No light between floors by Paul Tremblay. My head is a box full of wet cotton, and it won't hold anything else. Her voice is dust falling onto my ear. She says, "There's no light between floors." I blink. Minutes or hours pass. There's nothing to see. We're blind, but our bodies are close, and we form a yin and a yang. Although I don't know who is which. She's says the between floor stuff again. She speaks to my feet. They don't listen. Her feet are next to my head. I touch the bare skin of her ankle, of what I imagine to be her ankle. And it's warm, and I want to leave my hand there. She's telling me that we're trapped between floors. I think we're in the rubble of a giant building. It was thousands of miles tall. The building was big enough to go to the moon, where it had a second foundation. Most people agreed the top was the moon. The bottom was us. Her feet don't move and don't listen. I don't blame them. Her toes might be under sheetrock or a steel girder. There's only enough room in here for us. Everything presses down from above or up from below. I keep talking, my voice fills our precious space. Wait. It can't be the moon our building was built to. Maybe another planet with revolutions and rotations, orbital paths in sync with ours, so the giant building doesn't get twisted and torn apart. Maybe that's what happened. It did get twisted apart, and that's why we're here. I stopped talking because, like the giant building, my words fall apart and trap me. She flexes her calf muscle. Is she shaking me away? I move my hand off her leg, and I immediately regret it. I feel nothing now. Maybe her movement was just a muscle spasm. I could ask her, but that would be an awkward question depending on her answer. She says there are gods moving above us. I can hear them. I listen, and I don't hear any gods. It horrifies me that I can't hear them. It makes me think I am terribly broken. There's only the sound of my breathing, and it's so loud and close, like I'm inside my own lungs. She says they're the old gods, and they've been forgotten. They've returned, but they're suffering. And despite everything, they'll be forgotten again. Maybe I'm not supposed to hear the old gods. Or maybe I do hear them, and I've always heard them, and their sound is nothingness, and that means we're forgotten too. I put my hand back on her ankle. Her skin is cool now. Maybe it's my fault. My chest expands and gets tight. Lungs too greedy. My head and back press against the weight around me. I'm taking up too much space. I let air and words out into the crowded void, trying to make myself small again. I say, did the old gods make the building? Did they tear it down? Did they do this to us? Are they angry? Why are they always so angry? She says, I have a story. It's only one sentence long. There's a small child wandering a city and can't find her mother. That's it. It's sentimental and melodramatic, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen every day. She is starting to break under the stress of our conditions. I admire that she has lasted this long, but we can't stay in this no-room womb tomb forever. I should keep her talking so she doesn't lose consciousness. I say, who are you? I'm sorry I don't remember. She whispers. I don't hear every word, so I have to fill in the gaps. Dad died when I was 4 years old. He was short, bent, had those glasses that darkened automatically. And he loved flannel. At least that's what he looked like in pictures. We had pictures all over the house. Not pictures of him, actually. My only real memory of Dad is him picking up dog shit in the backyard. It's what he did every weekend. We lived on a hill, and the yard had a noticeable slant, so he stood lopsided to keep from falling. He used a gardener's trowel as a scoop and made the deposits into a plastic grocery bag. He let me hold the bag. His joke was that he was transporting, not cleaning, as he dumped the poop out in the woods across the street. Same spot every time. It was the only time he spent out in the yard with me, cleaning our dog's shit. I don't remember our dog's name. My father and the dog are just like the old gods. The old gods again. They make me nervous. Everything seems clearer and tighter after she speaks. My eyes strain against their lids and pray for light. They want to jump out and roll away. I say, what about the old gods? She says, I still hear them. They have their own language. I wait for another story that doesn't come. Her head is next to my feet, but so far away. Her ankle feels different, but that's not enough to go on. Finally, I say, maybe I should go find the old gods and tell them you're here. Since you seem to know them, maybe I'll apologize for not hearing them. My elbows are pinned against my chest, and I can't extend my arms. I do what I can to feel around me and around her legs. I find some space behind her left hip. I shift my weight and focus on my limited movement. Minutes and hours pass. My body turns slowly gods are watching, even though I won't be able to see the movement. Maybe that's blasphemous. I'll worry about it later. In order to turn my shoulders, I have to push my chest into her legs and hips. I apologize, but she doesn't say anything. I make sure I don't hit her with her head or with my feet. I pull myself over her legs, scraping my back against the rubble above me, pressing harder against her, and I'm trying the best I can to make myself flat. It's hard to breathe, and small white stars spot the blackness. I climb over her and reach into a tunnel where I'll have to crawl like a worm or a snake. But I have arms, and I wish I could leave them behind with her. I can't turn around, so I roll her back with my feet into the spot I occupied. Maybe it'll be more comfortable, and after I'm through, she can follow. I say, "Don't worry. I'll find your dad." And I remember that she told me he died. What a horrible thing for me to say. In the tunnel opening, I find a flat, square object. It's the size of my hand. The outer perimeter is metal with raised bumps that I try to read with my fingers. But they can't read. It's not their fault. I never trained them to do so. The center of the square is smooth and cool. Glass, I think. I know what it is. It's a picture frame. Hers or mine, I don't know. I slide it into my back pocket and I shimmy. Still blind, always blind, into the tunnel. Everything gets tighter. My arms are pinned to my sides. My untrained hands under my pelvis. My legs and feet do all the work. Those silly hands and useless digits fret and worry. The tunnel thins. I push my feet and roll my stomach muscles. The tunnel thins more. My shoulders are stuck. I can't move. Should I wait for her? She could push me through. Do I yell? Would the old gods help me then? But I'm afraid. If I yell, I might start an avalanche and close the tunnel. I'm afraid they won't help me. My heart pumps and swells. There isn't any room in here for it. The white stars return. Everything is tight and hard in my chest. I feel a breeze on my face. There must be more open space ahead. One more push. My feet are loud behind me. They're frantic rescue workers. I hope they don't panic. I need them to get through this. My shoulders ache and throb under the pressure. Leg muscles on fire. But I squeeze through and into a chamber big enough to crawl in. I feel around, looking for openings, looking for up. I still can't see. I'll use sinus pressure and spit to determine up and down. My legs shake and I need to rest. I take out the picture frame. My hands dance all over it. Maybe it's a picture of her father in the yard. He's wearing the flannel even in summer. I remember how determined he was to keep the yard clean. He didn't care if the grass grew or if my dog dug holes. He just wanted all the shit gone. I need to keep moving. I pocket the picture frame and listen again for the old gods. I still don't hear them. There's a wider path in the rubble. It expands and it goes up and I follow it. Dad had all kinds of picture frames that held black and white photos of obscure relatives or relatives who became obscure on the windowsills and hutches and almost anything with a flat, stable surface. He told me all their stories once, and I tried to listen and remember, but they're gone. After Dad died, Mom didn't take down or hide any of the pictures. She took to adding to the collection with random black and white photos she'd find at yard sales and antique shops. She filled the walls with them. Every couple of months, she moved and switched all the pictures around too, so we didn't know who our obscure relatives were and who were strangers. Nothing was labeled. Everyone had similar mustaches or wore the same hats and jackets and dresses, and everyone was forgotten even though they were all still there. I can't help but think hidden in the stash of pictures were the old gods. And they've always been watching me. The path in the rubble continues to expand. My crawl has become a walking crouch. There are hard lefts and rights. I can't go too fast as I almost fall into a deep drop. Maybe it's the drop I shouldn't be concerned about. What if I should be going down instead of up? The piled rubble implies a bottom. There's no guarantee there's a top. What if she did hear the old gods, but her sense of direction was all messed up? What if they're below us? Maybe that's fine too. I continue to climb and I try to concentrate. Thinking of the picture frame helps. In our house, there was a picture of a young man in an army uniform standing by himself on a beach, shirt sleeves rolled over his biceps. Probably circa World War II, but we didn't know for sure. He had an odd smirk. Like the Mona Lisa's, it always followed me. I also thought his face looked painted on. And at the same time, not all there, like it would float away if you stopped looking. So I stared at it a lot. If I had to guess, I'd say that's the picture in my back pocket. My crouch isn't necessary anymore, and now I'm standing and level, and the darkness isn't so dark. There are outlines and shapes and weak light. My feet shuffle on a thin carpet. I avoid the teeth of a ruined escalator. I'm dizzy, and my mouth tastes like tinfoil. There's a distant rumble, and the bones of everything rattle and shake loose dust. She was right. The old gods are here. I imagine they're beautiful and horrible and immense and alien because they are all eyes or mouths or arms, and they move the planets and stars around. I take the picture frame out of my pocket and clutch it to my chest. It's a shield. It's a teddy bear. I found it between floors. There's a jagged opening in the ruined building around me, and I walk through it. I emerge into an alien world. I'm not where I used to be. This is the top of the ruined building or its other bottom. The air here is thick, not well. Behind me there is a section of the building's second or other foundation that is still intact. My eyes sting, and my vision is blurry. But the sky is red, and there are mountains of glass and mountains of brick and mountains of metal, and I stand in the valley. Nothing grows here. There are eternal fires burning without smoke. Everything is so large, and I am so small. There are pools of fire and a layer of gray ash on the ground and mountains. I'm alone, and there's just so much space, and it's beautiful, but horrible too, because I can't make any sense of it, and there's too much space, too much room for possibility. Anything can happen here. I shouldn't be here. She was right not to follow me, because I climbed through the rubble in the wrong direction, and I think about going back, but then I see the old gods. I don't know how she heard them. They're as alien or other as I imagined, but not grand or powerful. They're small and fragile, like me. There is one old god between the mountains, and it walks slowly toward me. The old god is naked and sloughs its dead skin, strips hanging off of its fingers and elbows. Its head is all red holes and scaly, patchy skin. The old god must be at the end, or maybe the beginning of a metamorphosis. There is another kneeling at the base of the mountain of glass. The old god's back is all oozing boils and blisters. Its hands leave skin and bloody prints on the mountain. It speaks in a language of gurgles and hard consonants that I do not understand. The old god is blessing or damning everything it touches. I don't know if there's a difference. I find more old gods lying about. Some are covered in ash, and they look like the others, but they are asleep and dreaming their terrible dreams. And she was right again. They are all suffering. I didn't think they were supposed to suffer like this. I walk, and it's so hard to breathe, but I shouldn't be surprised given where I am. There's too much space. Everything is stretched out, and I'm afraid of the red sky. Then I hear her voice, her falling dust in my ears. She's behind me somewhere, maybe standing at the edge of our felled building in this other world. She asked me to tell the old gods, and I'm sorry I forgot them. My voice isn't very loud, and my throat hurts, but I tell them I'm sorry. I ask her if I'm the small child in the city looking for my mother in her one-line story. She tells me the old gods have names. Dresden, and Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. She knows the language of the old gods, and I know the words mean something, but it's beyond my grasp, like the seconds previously passed, and they all will be forgotten like those pictures and their stories in my mother's house. I'm still clutching the found picture framed to my chest. There's a ringing in my ears and my stomach burns. The old god walking toward me spews out a gout of blood. Then tremors rack its body. Flaps of skin peel off and fall like autumn leaves. Change is always painful. I take the frame off my chest and look at it. Focusing is difficult. There's no picture. It's empty. There's only a white sticker on the glass that reads $9.99. I feel dizzy, and I can't stay out here much longer. It's too much. And minutes and hours pass with me staring at the empty picture frame. And how wrong I was. How wrong I am. There's a great, all-encompassing white light that momentarily bleaches the red sky, and I shield my eyes with the empty frame. Then there's a rumble that shakes the planet, and well beyond the mountains that surround me, a great gray building reaches into the red sky. They're building it so fast, too fast, and that's why it'll eventually fall down, because they aren't taking their time. They're not showing care. It's still an awesome sight, despite what I know will happen to it. The top of the building billows out like the cap of a mushroom, and I try to yell stop, because they're constructing the building's second foundation in the sky. The building won't be anchored to anything. The sky certainly won't hold it. It'll fall. I don't want to watch it fall. I can't. So I turn away. She speaks to me again. She tells me to leave this place and come back. I do, and I walk, trying to avoid the gaze of the old gods. They make me feel guilty. They aren't looking at me. They cover their faces. They're afraid of the great light. Maybe they're just tired because they've seen it all before. I walk back to our ruined building, but she's not at the opening. She's already climbing back down. I'll follow. I'll climb back down to our space between floors and bring her the picture frame. I'll tell her it's a picture of my dad in the yard with flannel and his poop scoop. I ease back into the rubble, dowsing paths and gaps, climbing down, knowing eventually down will become up again. Or maybe I'll tell her it's a picture of that army guy I didn't know. Him and his inscrutable Mona Lisa smirk. Did he have the confidence and bravado of immortality? Or was he afraid of everything? She won't be able to see the picture, so I won't really be lying to her. Picture it'll be whatever I tell her it'll be. I won't tell her about the new giant building, the one that was gray and has a foundation in the sky. The gaps in the rubble narrow quickly, and everything is dark again. I once asked Mom why we kept all those old black and white pictures, and why she still bought more. Why all the walls and shelves of our house were covered with old photos and old faces. Everyone anonymous. Everyone dead. And she told me that they were keepsakes. Little bits of history. She liked having history around. Then she changed her mind and said no. They were simply reminders. I asked her, reminders of what? She didn't say anything, but gave me that same Mona Lisa smile from the photograph, but I know hers was afraid of everything. The picture is in my back pocket again. I'm gonna tell her that everyone who has ever forgotten is in that picture. We'll be in the picture too, so we won't forget again. I'm crawling, and the tunnel ahead will narrow. I can feel the difference in the air. There's another rumble above me, and the bones of everything shake again. But I won't see that horrible light down there. I'll be safe. What could I have done? I wonder if I should have tried to help them, but what could I have done? I suppose at the very least, I could have told the old gods that there is no light between the floors. No. En una noche pavorosa, inquieto, leía un vetusto mamotreto. Cuando creí escuchar un extraño ruido de repente, como si alguien tocase suavemente a mi puerta, visita impertinente. Dije y nada más. Me acuerdo muy bien, era un invierno. Impaciente medía el tiempo eterno, cansado de buscar en los libros la calma bienhechora al dolor de mi muerta Leonora, que habita con los ángeles ahora, para siempre o más. Sentí el sedeño, mi cruidor y elástico, rozar de las cortinas un fantástico terror como jamás sentido había, y quise aquel ruido, explicando mi espíritu oprimido, calmar por fin un viajero perdido. Dije, y nada más. Ya sintiendo más calma, caballero, exclamé, o dama, suplicaros quiero os servéis excusar, mas mi atención no estaba bien despierta, y fue vuestra llamada tan incierta. Abrí entonces de par en par la puerta. Tinieblas, nada más. Miro el espacio, exploro la tiniebla y siento entonces que mi mente puebla, turbo de ideas cual ningún otro mortal las tuvo antes, y escucho con oídos inhalantes Leonora, unas voces susurrantes, murmurar nada más. Vuelvo a mi estancia con pavor secreto y a escuchar tono pálido e inquieto más fuerte golpear. Algo me dijo, toca en mi ventana, comprender quiero la señal gana y calmar esta angustia sobrehumana. El viento y nada más. Y la ventana abrí, replicando, vi entonces un cuervo venerando como ave de otra edad. Sin mayor ceremonia entró en mis salas con gesto señorial y negras alas, y sobre un busto en el dintel de palas posóse y nada más. Miró el pájaro negro sonriente ante su grave y serio continente, y le comenzó a hablar, no sin un dejo de intención irónica. Oh cuervo, oh venerable ave anacrónica, ¿cuál es tu nombre en la región plutónica? Dijo el cuervo, nunca más. En este caso, al grotesco y raro. Maravilleme al escuchar tan claro tal nombre pronunciar. Y debo confesar que sentí susto, pues ante nadie, creo, tuvo el gusto de un cuervo ver posado sobre un busto, con tu nombre, nunca más. Quasi hubiese vertido en ese acento. El alma cayó, el ave y ni un momento. Las plumas movió ya. Otros de mí han huido y se me alcanza que él partirá mañana sin tardanza, como me ha abandonado la esperanza, dijo el cuervo, nunca más. Una respuesta a escuchar tan neta, me dije no sin inquietud secreta, es esto nada más. Cuánto aprendió de un amo infortunado, a quien tenaz ha perseguido el lado, y por solo extravío ha conservado. Ese nunca más, nunca más. Rodé mi asiento hasta quedar enfrente de la puerta del busto y del vidente cuervo, y entonces reclinado en la blanda cerrería, en sueños fantásticos me hundía, pensando siempre que decir quería aquel jamás, jamás. Largo tiempo quedéme así en reposo, aquel extraño pájaro ominoso, mirando sin cesar. Ocupaba el diván de terciopelo. Juntos nos sentamos y en mi duelo pensaba que ella nunca en este suelo lo ocuparía más. Entonces parecióme el aire denso con el aroma de quemado incienso de un invisible altar. Y escucho voces repetir fervientes. Olvida lo Leonor, bebe el nepentes, bebe el olvido en sus letales fuentes. Dijo el cuervo, nunca más. Profeta dije, ahogar de otras edades que arrojaron las negras tempestades aquí para mi mal. Huéspedes de morada de tristura, di fosco engendro de la noche oscura. Si un bálsamo habrá al fin a mi amargura, dijo el cuervo, nunca más. Profete, dije, oh diablo, infausto cuervo, por Dios, por mí, por mi dolor acerbo, por tu poder fatal. Dime si alguna vez a Leonora volveré a ver en la eterna aurora, donde feliz con los querubes mora. Dijo el cuervo, nunca más. seta palabra la postera. Retorna a la plutónica ribera. Grité, no vuelvas más. No dejes ni una huella, ni una pluma y mi espíritu envuelto en densa bruma. Libro por fin el peso que él abruma. Dio el cuervo. Nunca más. Y el cuervo inmóvil, fúnebre y adusto, sigue siempre de pelas sobre el busto y bajo mi fanal proyecta mancha lúgubre en la alfombra y su mirada de demonio asombra. Ay, mi alma enlutada de su sombra se librará nunca más. True. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. Why will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It's impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you would see, he would have been very profound old man, a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. You may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in. I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul. when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well, many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept. It has welled up from my own bosom, deepening, with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled it hard. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He'd been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes. He'd been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found it all in vain. All in vain. Because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, a very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open. Wide open. And I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I'm nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. louder. Louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor, and I pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I'd been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I'd made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to research the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued to gain definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Oh my God, no, no! They heard. They suspected. They knew. They knew they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart. apologize for the pause, but I was looking for books that cannot be found. Quite a number of good books have been missing for a while. Do you like the stories that have been told? Indeed. Is the volume okay? I tried reading close to the microphone. I tried knowing that I'd be louder to move the microphone farther away. The levels do not seem too high, though in my early monitor it seems loud enough. Any tweaking suggestions would be supposedly appreciated. I don't know how I'll take things. Let's hope it'll be crazy cat. Crazy cat. Oh, right. That's right. I need to take a small break and do a quick Duolingo lesson so I don't lose my 309-day streak. Enjoy the fire cracklings. Six minutes? 7 minutes? I don't know. I'll try to be quick. Apologize for that. I thought I'd done it already today, but apparently not. And I only had an hour left to go. 305 days. I haven't used any skips or streaks or cheats or anything. Every single day I've done it, so I don't want to mess up now. 2 or 3 days I can go without even looking at it, and they'll give me a break. I like seeing the solid gold all the way through the months. It makes me feel special or something. I don't know. It really is effective, this Duolingo streak. Because when I started a few years ago, I went for a couple months and then I just dropped out and I somehow missed the streak. I just let it go. And I just didn't feel like doing it anymore. It took me 2 years almost to get back into it and try again. It's very effective, this streak stuff, but once it's done, I mean, as far as I go, and some people I've talked to, you just don't want to do it anymore, and that's kind of not cool. You gotta always want to keep going no matter what. And it's so easy to just lose it. But I guess that's kind of the point, right? People who don't lose it, they got something to brag about. But you should always encourage learning. I mean, I guess. Let's see. Now I got a couple of these collections of short stories on my own somewhere, but I've lost them. I'm afraid I've lost a box while moving. With all the best stuff in it. The books I really want. The ones I really like. I don't know where they are. So I have to rely on what the library can give me. So, this is the one book I've got. I've got a few books. But as far as this author, this is the one I can get because he's so in demand. Even with electronic media, for whatever reason, I'm on hold for some of the other stuff. So, let's try one. I don't know. Now I gotta do it, right? I gotta do it. Let's read this one because I do not remember it at all. Which has gotta be a good sign, right? Hello? Let me take a swig. Excuse me, sorry. Cain Rose Up by Stephen King. Garish walked out of the bright May sunshine and into the coolness of the dorm. It took his eyes a moment to adjust, and at first Harry the Beaver was just a bodiless voice from the shadows. "It was a bitch, wasn't it?" the Beaver asked. "Wasn't that one a really truly bitch?" "Yes," Garish said. "It was tough." Now his eyes pulled in the Beaver. He was rubbing a hand across the pimples on his forehead and sweating under his eyes. He was wearing sandals and a '69 t-shirt with a button on the front that said Howdy Doody was a pervert. The Beaver's huge buck teeth loomed in the gloom. "I was going to drop it in January," the Beaver said. "I kept telling myself to do it while there was still time. And then that drop was over, and it was either go for it or pick up an incomplete. I think I flunged it, Kurt. Honest to God." The house mother stood in the corner by the mailboxes. She was an extremely tall woman who looked vaguely like Rudolph Valentino. She was trying to push a slip strap back under the sweaty armhole of her dress with one hand while she tacked up a dorm sign-out sheet with the other. "Tough," Garish repeated. "I wanted to bag a few off you, but I didn't dare, honest to God. That guy's got eyes like an eagle. You think you got your A all right?"
I guess maybe I flunked.
The beaver gaped.
You think you flunked? You think you...
I'm gonna take a shower, okay?
Yeah, sure, Kurt. Sure. Was that your last test?
Yeah, Garrus said. That was my last test. Garrus crossed the lobby and pushed through the doors and began to climb. The stairwell smelled like an athletic supporter. Same old stairs. His room was on the 5th floor. Quinn and that other idiot from 3, the one with the hairy legs, piled by him, tossing a softball back and forth. A little fellow wearing horn-rimmed glasses and a valiantly struggling goatee passed him between 4 and 5, holding a calculus book to his chest like a Bible, his lips moving on a rosary of logarithms. His eyes were blank as blackboards. Garrus paused and looked after him, wondering if he wouldn't be better off dead, but the little fellow was now only a bobbing, disappearing shadow on the wall. It bobbed once more and was gone. Garrus climbed to 5 and walked down the hall to his room. Pigpen had left 2 days ago. 4 finals in 3 days. Wham, bam, and thank you, ma'am. Pigpen knew how to arrange things. He had left only his pin-ups, 2 dirty mismatched sweat socks, and a ceramic parody of Rodin's Thinker perched on a toilet seat. Garrus put his key in the lock and turned it.
Kurt! Hey, Kurt!
Rollins, the asinine floor counselor who had sent Jimmy Brody up to visit the Dean of Men for a drinking offense, was coming down the hall waving at him. He was tall, well-built, crew-cut, symmetrical. He looked varnished.
You all done?
Rollins asked. Yeah.
Well, don't forget to sweep the floor of the room and fill out the damage report, okay?
Yeah.
I slid a damage report under your door last Thursday, didn't I?
Yeah.
If I'm not in my room, just slide the damage report and the key under the door.
Okay. Rollins seized his hand and shook it twice. Fast, pump, pump. Rollins's palm was dry, the skin grainy. Shaking hands with Rollins was like shaking hands with a fistful of salt.
Have yourself a good summer, man.
Right.
Don't work too hard.
No.
Use it, but don't abuse it.
I will and I won't. Rollins looked momentarily puzzled, then he laughed.
Well, take care now.
He slammed Garrus's shoulder and then walked back down the hall, pausing once to tell Ron Frayne to turn down his stereo. Garrus could see Rollins lying dead in a ditch with maggots in his eyes. Rollins wouldn't care. Neither would the maggots. You either ate the world or the world ate you, and it was okay either way. Garrus stood thoughtfully, watching until Rollins was out of sight, and then he let himself into his room. With Pigpen's cyclonic clutter gone, it looked barren and sterile. The swirled, heaped, drifted pile that had been Pigpen's bed was stripped down to the bare, if slightly cum-stained, mattress pad. 2 Playboy gatefolds looked down at him with frozen 2-dimensional come-ons. Not much change in Garrus's half of the room, which had always been barracks neat. You could drop a quarter on the top blanket of Garrus's bed and it would bounce. All that neat had gone on Piggy's nerves. He was an English major with a fine turn of phrase. He called Garrus a pigeonholer. The only thing on the wall above Garrus's bed was a huge blow-up of Humphrey Bogart that he had gotten in the college bookstore. Bogey had an automatic pistol in each hand and he was wearing suspenders. Pigpen said pistols and braces were impotency symbols. Garrus doubted if Bogey had been impotent, although he had never read anything about him. He went to the closet door, unlocked it, and brought out the big walnut-stocked .352 Magnum that his father, a Methodist minister, had bought him for Christmas. He had bought the telescopic sight himself last March.
You weren't supposed to have guns in your room, not even hunting rifles. But it hadn't been hard. He had signed it out at the university gun store's room the day before with a forged withdrawal slip. He put it in his waterproof leather scabbard and left it in the woods behind the football field. Then this morning, around 3 a.m., he just went out and got it and brought it upstairs through the sleeping corridors. He sat down on the bed with the gun across his knees and wept a little bit. The thinker on the toilet seat was looking at him. Garish put the gun on his bed, crossed the room, and slapped it off Piggy's table and onto the floor, where it shattered. There was a knock at the door. Garish put the rifle under his bed. "Come in." It was Bailey, standing there in his skivvies. There was a puff of lint in his belly button. There was no future for Bailey. Bailey would marry a stupid girl and they would have stupid kids. Later on, he would die of cancer or maybe renal failure. "How was the chem final, Kurt?" "All right. I just wondered if I could borrow your notes. I've got it tomorrow." "I burned them with my trash this morning." "Oh. Hey, Jesus. Did Piggy go and do that?" He pointed at the remains of the thinker. "I guess so." "Why do you want to go and do that? I like that thing. I was gonna buy it off of him." Bailey had sharp, ratty little features. His skivvies were thready and saggy-seated. Garish could see exactly how he would look dying of emphysema or something in an oxygen tent. How he would look yellow. I could help you, Garish thought. "You think you'd mind if I scoffed up those pin-ups?" "I guess not." "Okay." Bailey crossed the room, stepping his bare feet gingerly over the pottery shards, and untacked the playmates. "That picture of Bogart's really sharp, too. No tits, but hey, you know." Bailey peered at Garish to see if Garish would smile. When Garish did not, he said, "I don't suppose you planned on throwing it away or anything?" "No, I was just getting ready to take a shower." "Okay, have a good summer if I don't see you again, Kurt." "Thanks." Bailey went back to the door, the seat of his skivvies flapping. He paused at the door. "Another 4-point this semester, Kurt?" "At least." "Good deal. See you next year." He went out and closed the door. Garish sat on the bed for a little while, then took the gun out, stripped it, and cleaned it. He put the muzzle up to his eye and looked at the tiny circle of light at the far end. The barrel was clean. He reintegrated the gun. In the third drawer of his bureau were 3 heavy boxes of Winchester ammunition. He laid these on the windowsill. He locked the room's door and went back to the window, pulled the blinds up. The mall was bright and gleaming, peppered with strolling students. Quinn and his idiot friend had gotten up a raggle-taggle softball game. They scurried back and forth like crippled ants escaping a broken burrow. "Let me tell you something," Garish told Bogey. "God got mad at Kane because God had an idea God was a vegetarian. His brother knew better. God made the world in his image. If you don't eat the world eats you." Kane says to his brother, "Why didn't you tell me?" His brother says, "Why didn't you listen?" Kane says, "Okay, I'm listening now." So he waxes his brother. He says, "Hey, God, you want meat? Here it is. You want roast, or ribs, or Abel burgers, or what?" God told him to put on his boogie shoes. So No reply from Bogey. Garrish put the window up and rested his elbows on the ledge, now letting the barrel of the .352 project out into the sunlight. He looked into the sight. He was centered on Carlton Memorial Women's Dormitory across the mall. Carlton was more popularly known as the Dog Kennels. He put the crosshairs on a big Ford wagon. A blonde co-ed in jeans and a blue shell top was talking to her mother while her father, red-faced and balding, loaded suitcases into the back. Someone knocked on the door. Garrish waited. The knock came again.
Kurt, I'll give you half a rock for the Bogart poster.
Bailey. Garrish said nothing. The girl and her mother were laughing at something, not knowing there were microbes in their intestines, feeding, dividing, multiplying. The girl's father joined them and they stood in the sunlight together, a family portrait in the crosshairs.
Damn it all,
Bailey said. His feet patted down the hall. Garrish squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked hard against his shoulder. The good padded kick you get when you have seated the gun in exactly the right place. The smiling girl's blonde head sheared itself away. Her mother went on smiling for a moment, and then her hand went to her mouth. She screamed through her hand. Garrish shot through it. Hand and head disappeared in a red spray. The man who had been loading the suitcases broke into a lumbering run. Garrish tracked him and shot him in the back. He raised his head, looking out of the sight for a moment. Quinn was holding the softball and looking at the blonde girl's brains, which were splattered on the no parking sign behind her prone body. Quinn didn't move. All across the mall, people stood frozen, like children engaged in a game of statues. Somebody pounded on the door, then rattled the handle. Bailey again.
Kurt, you alright, Kurt? I think somebody...
Good drink, good meat. Good God, let's eat.
Garrish exclaimed and shot at Quinn. He pulled instead of squeezing, and the shot went wide. Quinn was running. No problem. The second shot took Quinn in the neck, and he flew maybe 20 feet.
Kurt, Garrish is killing himself!
Bailey was screaming.
Rollins, come quick!
His footsteps faded down the hall. Now they were starting to run. Garrish could hear them screaming. Garrish could hear the faint smack-smack sound of their shoes on the walks. He looked up at Bogey. Bogey held his two guns and looked beyond him. They looked at the shattered remnants of Piggy's thinker and wondered what Piggy was doing today. If he was sleeping or watching TV, or eating some great big wonderful meal. Eat the world, Piggy, Garrish thought. You gulped that sucker right down.
Garrish!
It was Rollins now, pounding on the door.
Open up, Garrish!
It's locked, Bailey panted.
He looked lousy. He killed himself. I know it.
Garrish pushed the muzzle out of the window again. A boy in a Madras shirt was crouched down behind a bush, scanning the dormitory windows with desperate intensity. He wanted to run for it, Garrish saw, but his legs were frozen. Good God, let's eat, Garrish murmured and began to pull the trigger again.
like to continue with a story called The Place. A story I've never read before. A story written by John Gordon, which is close to a pseudonym I wanted to choose for myself once, considering my family connections to the Gordon family of Scotland. But this one's actually done it and published. It's fairly short, so let's see what it's like. Could be good, could be bad, who knows? Right. Looking through the author's biography. Okay. The Place. Let's grab a swig. Right, Jerry-O?
You must have been very afraid, she said.
Well, I didn't like it much.
I should have died.
Yes.
He fell silent, and when he resumed, he spoke slowly.
I was too afraid to open the curtains. At least while the light was on in the room. Whatever it was out there could have looked in and seen me, and I couldn't have seen it, whatever it was.
You could have put the light out.
Then I would have to cross the room in the dark, go right up to the curtains, and...
Stop, you make me shiver.
She paused.
Why didn't you go to the phone?
In spite of the darkness, she could see a smile.
Don't tell me you've forgotten the phone,
she said. No, I hadn't forgotten.
You're gonna tell me the lines have been cut.
No, the phone was working.
Thank goodness.
I heard it ring.
Well then.
She let out her breath, relieved. The phone is in the hall, he said.
Oh, I see, in the dark.
No. I told you I'd put on every light in the house. The hall was very bright. It must have been bright.
Must have been. Didn't you go out there?
I'm sure it was bright, because the lights in the room hadn't failed. They didn't ever flicker. You know what it's like on a windless night in summer, with the lights burning? It was all quite calm.
Except you.
Except me.
Who was ringing?
I don't know. I didn't leave the room. Somebody else answered the phone.
What a relief. So there was somebody else in the house after all.
There was somebody else in the house, wasn't there?
There was somebody else in... Sorry. There was somebody else in the house, wasn't there?
I don't know why I'm telling you this. Not now, just before we're married.
Or maybe it's a test. To see if I love you in spite of it all.
Even if my house is Bluebeard's castle, and all my previous wives are lying there murdered.
Our castle. I fell in love with it before I even knew you.
Yes. This place does have that effect. On most people. I was the same. That's why I have to tell you everything about it. Everything that I told you earlier is true. The house was empty except for me.
But somebody answered the phone.
There was a sound like footsteps. and the phone stopped ringing.
Don't go on. Not while we're out here in the dark.
Alright.
Alright? You mean you're not going to tell me what happened next?
Well, you said. You've got to. There's not much more to tell. I sat there. There were no more phone calls. No more footsteps. Towards dawn, the scratching and tapping at the window stopped altogether. Then I went to bed.
To bed? I don't know how you could. I should have fainted. They would have found me white-haired in the morning, dead of gibbering or something.
It's my own place. One learns not to be afraid.
And nothing since?
Nothing. I don't care what happened. It's a beautiful house. I can't wait to live in it. With you. They were at the end of a long avenue of trees. He put his arm around her waist, and they looked back towards the house.
Its windows are so small from here. It looks tiny, yet it's a big house. Very big house. And the grounds are huge.
I sometimes don't know myself where they end, and then I find myself on other people's property. I rather like that.
You are odd. When I live here, I won't ever want to go outside in the boundary. I won't ever want to go outside the boundary.
I felt like that, and so did. I'm sorry.
There's no need to be sorry. I know it was her house. You've told me all that.
I was like you. It was the place that attracted me. She may have been living here still if it wasn't for me.
No. It was she who ran away. She just left all this. And you. I know it wasn't your fault.
She changed so suddenly. Nothing had happened until that day. And then it was just the smallest of arguments. I can't even remember what it was all about. I've tried. Tried many times to bring it back, but it eludes me.
I know.
She had heard him speak of it before, but made no effort to stop him. The more he spoke of it, the quicker the memory would be, if not obliterated, at least softened. She let me go into the house first. She held back because she was angry, and the door closed behind me. I remember how I felt as it shut. It slammed. I hadn't touched it, but it slammed. And I remember suddenly feeling delighted, wanting her to feel that I'd slammed it. But more than that, I suddenly felt in possession of the house, her house. But now she was outside, on the other side of the shut door, and the house was mine. It was as though the house wanted me, not her. They walked on a few paces nearer the house before he resumed. I was, I suppose, slow in opening the door. Just too slow. Just a fragment of a second too slow. And when I did so, she had turned and was running away along the avenue.
This avenue.
I don't know, it might have been.
And you never saw her again.
No. I waited. Then one day they wrote and told me she had died. they wrote. They did not give me time to reach her. They had had the funeral before I could get there. They had not waited me. They had not wanted me. I don't know what she had told him.
So you came back here?
Well, I had to. I love the place.
I can't blame you. I'd feel the same.
He stopped and turned towards her. So, we have no secrets. I've told you everything.
I know.
And you have no secrets?
And it was afterwards you thought the house was haunted?
Just that one night.
You were under a great strain.
It was after it happened that the place began to feel emptier and emptier. And then you came along.
It was the house. The house came first. These avenues, they all lead straight to the house. How many are there?
I've never counted them. And you're mistaken. They're not all straight. Sometimes you lose sight of the house altogether.
But not tonight. And the moon's directly over it, so we couldn't lose it even if we tried. It really is lovely.
But haunted.
That was your last secret. But now you've told me, so it doesn't matter anymore. It's all gone. Vanished.
She kissed him.
Let's get back to the others. We're so far away, you can't even hear them.
Perhaps everybody's gone. It's late.
All the better. I'd like to have it all to myself. And I hate a party that goes on too long.
But they're my friends.
There's always another day.
I want to see them.
You don't think they've been frightened away, do you?
What makes you say that?
Ghosts.
He shook his head.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't make a joke of it. It must have been very frightening. You must not blame yourself for being afraid. It's bad enough having a ghost outside the house, but have one inside as well.
There was only one. The footsteps inside were the only sounds an old house can make. And telephones eventually have to stop ringing. They can't go on forever. The only ghost was on the one outside, trying to get in.
But it didn't. And it went away and never came back.
I should at least have opened the curtains.
Why do you blame yourself?
I could have learned something. All I had to do was open the curtains. But I was too afraid.
You missed nothing, my darling. There's only a tree tapping at the window.
There are no trees that close.
A creeper. It was a moth or something, attracted by the light.
But he was striding on now, and she had to run a pace or two to catch up. He was gazing ahead. They've gone. They've all gone. Lights buried in every window, laying patches of brightness on the paving of the terrace. There was no car, not even the sound of a motor in the distance. At the heart of the avenues, the house spread its own radiance like a silent star.
I'm glad. We don't need anybody.
They've deserted us.
I don't care. We've got it all to ourselves.
She walked across the gravel to where the light from the open door folded itself down the steps and reached out like a carpet to greet her. The hall was beautiful, full of dazzling light. Within it, there were many doors leading to the intricacies of the house itself. The staircase curved away to the momentary darkness of the landing. There was so much to explore, and now she could do so because it was all hers. She paused on the steps. "Let's go in together." But he had crossed the gravel to gaze into the tunnel of trees into which the cars must have disappeared. He did not answer. A tiny spasm of annoyance at his neglect crossed her mind, and she stepped into the hall alone. It was then that she saw that history was repeating itself. The quarrel, the drawing apart which put one inside the house and the other outside, and she acted to prevent it. She held the door to stop it swinging if a gust of wind should funnel through the house, and she turned to beg him to come with her. But already he was entering the blackness of the avenue. No matter. She was in control. She could decide what happened next. She opened her mouth to call out and bring him back. At that instant, as though to obliterate any sound she could make, the telephone on the little table behind her began to ring. She started and swung around. The door, reacting to her sudden movement, slid away from her and slammed shut. She reached for the lock, but it was stiff and complicated, and as she fumbled at it, the phone dinned at her from its perch, like a black goblin scolding and shrieking. She left the door and went towards it to silence it. As she moved, a little more of the landing came into view. Matching her pace for pace, there seemed to be a figure moving towards the head of the stairs. Yet all of the guests had gone. She spun and ran into the nearest room. The second door slammed behind her, and she was alone. She remained where she was, her back against the door. Thank God for all the light. She sat down. He was only just outside. He would soon be back. She was heard through the ringing of the phone, his steps in the hall. Then, mercifully, the phone fell silent. She breathed deeply twice and let her head fall forward. In a moment, when her heart steadied, she would get up and go to him. The hall was quiet now. It must have been the light shining up through the railings of the landing that had persuaded her there was a figure there. She smiled and let her mind explore the hall, and beyond it to the other rooms. They were all bright, empty, and calm. She breathed easier and raised her head. It was time to go to meet him. She was still sitting when, beyond the closed curtains, something tapped on the glass. I'm going to try one of these Robert E. Howard stories. But I was reading through today, and I already know there's some issues with some H.P. Lovecraft stuff because he's kind of just a little bit racist, a little bit, Nazi sympathizer, a little Hitler loving, kind of questionable. Or not questionable at all, and just, Robert E. Howard, I know, is a contemporary of his. So I was moving through kind of carefully reading some of these stories. And I caught a couple, and I was like, oh, I'll read through a little bit. Glad I did. Reached an N-word, and I'm like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I wish, it wasn't the case, because he's a good writer. Why you gotta be doing that, Robert? Dude was crazy. Schizophrenic. If anything's to be believed. Yeah, this is the Conan author, the guy who created Conan and Crawl and whatever. Was it Crawl or Call? I don't know. Red Sonja and Solomon Kane. I heard once that when he was doing the Conan stuff, he believed that Conan, the character himself, was standing behind him, ready to split him in twain with an axe if he stopped writing. Embellishment maybe, but the dude was crazy. Certainly. But a good writer. That doesn't excuse things. I'm gonna try this story. It's called The Touch of Death, and if it gets anything kind of weird... I mean, I was reading one where it was supposed to be in Mexico, and he started talking about Indians, and I mean, I know that was the way it was. You just called them Indians, but it's not true, and I also worry a bit that they're, you know... I don't want to get too into it, that's why I stopped reading. But I'll try this. It's called The Touch of Death by Robert E. Howard. And if I see anything where I'm just like, no, I'll just stop, but give them a chance. I know you hear a lot that, you know, it was a different time, but it is true, it was a different time. And people are afraid to, you know, you just don't want to give anybody any leeway, but I give everybody a leeway. But, you know, so many hits against my window, and I'm going to close the blinds. I don't believe in closing them just because someone tells you to do it, so I'm going to look out myself, and if I don't like it, then I'll close it. I don't know about this guy, but let's see where it goes. It's not to say don't give him a chance. I honestly don't know. All right. With all that being awfully said awfully. It's a bit warm now. Take my inhaler hit and continue. The Touch of Death by Robert E. Howard. As long as midnight cloaks the earth with shadows grim and stark, God save us from the Judas kiss of a dead man in the dark. Old Adam Farrow lay dead in the house wherein he had lived alone for the last 20 years. A silent, churlish recluse. In his life he had no known friends, and only 2 men had watched his passing. Dr. Stein rose and glanced out the window into the gathering dusk. "You think you can spend the night here, then?" he asked his companion. This man, Fallred by name, assented. "Yes, certainly. I guess it's up to me." "Rather a useless and primitive custom, sitting up with the dead," commented the doctor, preparing to depart. "But I suppose, in common decency, we'll have to bow to precedence. Maybe I can find someone who will come over here and help you with your vigil." Fallred shrugged his shoulders. "I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked. Wasn't known by many people. I scarcely knew him myself. I don't mind sitting up with a corpse." Dr. Stein was removing his rubber gloves, and Fallred watched the process with an interest that almost amounted to fascination. A slight involuntary shudder shook him at the memory of touching those gloves. Sick, cold, clammy things like the touch of death. "Now you might get lonely tonight.
if I don't find anyone. Not superstitious, are you? Oh, scarcely. To tell you the truth, from what I hear of Farrell's disposition, I'd rather be watching his corpse than have been his guest in life. The door closed and Fallred took up his vigil. He seated himself in the only chair in the room, glanced casually at the formless sheeted bulk on the bed opposite him, and began to read by the light of the dim lamp which stood on the rough table. Outside, the darkness gathered swiftly, and finally Fallred laid down his magazine to rest his eyes. He looked again at the shape which had in life been the form of Adam Farrell, wondering what quirk in the human nature made the sight of a corpse not only so unpleasant, but such an object of fear to many. Unthinking ignorance, seeing in dead things a reminder of death to come, he decided lazily and began idly contemplating as to what life had held for this grim and crabbed old man, who had neither relatives nor friends, and who had seldom left his house wherein he had died. The usual tales of miser-hoarded wealth had accumulated, but Fallred felt so little interest in the whole matter that it was not even necessary for him to overcome any temptation to pry about the house for possible hidden treasure. He returned to his reading with a shrug. The task was more boresome than he had thought for. After a while he was aware that every time he looked up from his magazine, and his eyes fell upon the bed with its grim occupant, he stared involuntarily as if he had for an instant forgotten the presence of the dead man and was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The start was slight and instinctive, but he felt almost angered at himself. He realized for the first time the utter and deadening silence which enwrapped the house, a silence apparently shared by the night, for no sound came through the window. Adam Farrell had lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Fallred shook himself as if to rid his mind of unsavory speculations, and went back to his reading. A sudden vagrant gust of wind whipped through the window, in which the light in the lamp flickered and went out suddenly. Fallred, cursing softly, groped in the darkness for matches, burning his fingers on the hot lamp chimney. He struck a match, relighted the lamp, and glancing over at the bed, got a horrible mental jolt. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him, the dead eyes wide and blank, framed in the gnarled, gray features. Even as Fallred instinctively shuddered, his reason explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet that covered the corpse had been carelessly thrown across the face, and the sudden puff of wind had disarranged and flung it aside. Yet there was something grisly about the thing, something fearsomely suggestive, as if in the cloaking dark a dead hand had flung aside the sheet, just as if the corpse were about to rise. Fallred, an imaginative man, shrugged his shoulders at these ghastly thoughts and crossed the room to replace the sheet. The dead eyes seemed to stare at him malevolently, with an evilness that transcended the dead man's churlishness in life. The workings of a vivid imagination Fallred knew, and he recovered the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh, slick and clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural revulsion of the living for the dead, and went back to his chair and magazine. At last, growing sleepy, he lay down upon a couch which, by some strange whim of the original owner, formed part of the room's scant furnishings, and composed himself for slumber. He decided to leave the light burning, telling himself that it was in accordance with the usual custom of leaving lights burning for the dead. For he was not willing to admit to himself that already he was conscious of a dislike for lying in the darkness with a corpse. He dozed, awoke with a start, and looked at the sheeted form of the bed. Silence reigned over the house, and outside it was very dark. The hour was approaching midnight, with its accompanying eerie domination over the human mind. Fallred glanced again at the bed where the body lay and found the sight of the sheeted object most repellent. A fantastic idea had birth in his mind and grew that beneath the sheet the mere lifeless body had become a strange, monstrous thing, a hideous conscious being that watched him with eyes which burned through the fabric of the cloth. This thought, a mere fantasy, of course, he explained to himself by the legends of vampires, undead, ghosts, and such like, the fearsome attributes with which the living have cloaked the dead for countless ages, since primitive man first recognized in death something horrid and apart from life. Man feared death, thought Fallred, and some of his fear of death took hold on the dead so that they too were feared, and the sight of the dead engendered grisly thoughts, gave rise to dim fears of hereditary memory, lurking back in the dark corners of the brain. At any rate, that silent hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He thought of uncovering the face, on the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. The sight of the features, calm and still in death, would banish, he thought, all such wild conjectures as were haunting him in spite of himself. But he thought of those dead eyes staring in the lamplight was intolerable. So at last he blew out the light and lay down. This fear had been stealing upon him so insidiously and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. With the extinguishing of the light, however, and the blotting out of the sight of the corpse, things assumed their true character and proportions, and Fallred fell asleep almost instantly, on his lips a faint smile for his previous folly. He awakened suddenly. How long he had been asleep he did not know. He sat up, his pulse pounding frantically, the cold sweat beating his forehead. He knew instantly where he was, remembered the other occupant of the room, but what had awakened him? A dream? Yes, now he remembered. A hideous dream in which the dead man had risen from the bed and stalked stiffly across the room with eyes of fire and a horrid leer frozen on his gray lips. Fallred had seemed to lie motionless, helpless. Then, as the corpse reached a gnarled and horrible hand, he had awakened. Ooh. He strove to pierce the gloom, but the room was all blackness, and all without was dark, so dark that no gleam of light came through the window. He reached a shaking hand toward the lamp, then recoiled as if from a hidden serpent. Sitting there in the dark with a fiendish corpse was bad enough, but he dared not light the lamp, for fear that his reason would be snuffed out like a candle at what he might see. Horror, stark and unreasoning, had full possession of his soul. He no longer questioned the instinctive fears that rose in him. All those legends he had heard came back to him and brought a belief in them. Death was a hideous thing, a brain-shattering horror, imbuing lifeless men with a horrid malevolence. Adam Farrell in his life had been simply a churlish but harmless man. Now he was a terror, a monster, a fiend lurking in the shadows of fear, ready to leap on mankind with talons dipped deep in death and insanity. Fallred sat there, his blood freezing, and fought out his silent battle. Faint glimmerings of reason had begun to touch his fright when a soft, stealthy sound again froze him. He did not recognize it as a whisper of the night wind across the windowsill. His frenzied fancy knew it was only the tread of death and horror. He sprang from the couch, then stood undecided. Escape was in his mind, but he was too dazed to even try to formulate a plan of escape. Even his sense of direction was gone. Fear had so stultified his mind that when he was not able to think consciously, the blackness spread in long waves about him, and its darkness and void entered into his brain. His motions, such as they were instinctive. He seemed shackled with mighty chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly like an imbecile's. A terrible horror grew up in him and reared its grisly shape, and the dead man was behind him, was stealing upon him from the rear. He was no longer thought of lighting the lamp. He no longer thought of anything. Fear filled his whole being. There was room for nothing else. He backed slowly away in the darkness, hands behind him, instinctively feeling the way. With a terrific effort, he partly shook the clinging mists of horror behind him, and the cold sweat, clammy upon his body, strove to orient himself. He could see nothing, but the bed was across the room, in front of him. He was backing away from it. There was where the dead man was lying. According to all rules of nature, if the thing were as he felt behind him, then the old tales were true. Death did implant in lifeless bodies an unearthly animation, and dead men did roam the shadows to work their ghastly and evil will upon the sons of men. Then, great God, what was man but a wailing infant, lost in the night, and beset by frightful things from the black abysses and the terrible unknown voids of space and time? These conclusions he did not reach by any reasoning process. They leaped full-grown into his terror-dazed brain. He worked his way slowly backward, groping, clinging to the thought that the dead man must be in front of him. This, his back-flung hands encountered something slick, cold and clammy, like the touch of death. A scream shook the echoes, followed by the crash of a falling body. The next morning, they who came to the house of death found 2 corpses in the room. Adam Farrell's sheeted body lay motionless upon the bed, and across the room lay the body of Fallred. Beneath the shelf, where Dr. Stein had absent-mindedly left his gloves. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy to the touch of a hand groping in the dark. A hand of one fleeing his own fear. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy with cold, like the touch of death. One more very short story for you before I leave for the night. It's a story by Michael Marshall Smith. It's called The Naughty Step. When I am bad, my daddy makes me sit on the naughty step. It's a funny name for a step, 'cause it's not naughty, just the step where I have to sit. It's a step near the bottom of the stairs that go from the bottom of our house up to the next floor. Because of the way our house is made, the bottom of our house is actually a bit below the street outside. But the next floor up is a little bit above the street. And so when you leave the house through the front door, you have to go down a few stone steps to get to the path. I don't know why they'd make a house like that, but they did. And that's where we live. When I'm on the naughty step, I can see into the family room. It used to be the kitchen, but someone who lived here turned the other room into the kitchen, and now the kitchen's a family room. There are windows in there, and I can see them through the doorway. One of the windows is brighter than the others now, and more interesting things happen through it. So when I'm on the naughty step, I watch that one if I can. I'm on the naughty step a lot. At first, my daddy used to only put me on it once in a while, but he says that I got naughtier and naughtier, so I ended up sitting on here more. I think it's true that I got more naughty, but I think also we got cross more too. The last time I was bad, my daddy got so cross, much more cross than I've ever seen before. I've been very, very naughty, it's true. I had deliberately broken something that belonged to my mummy, and then I hit her on the arm, but it was not hard. I was just grumpy because they would not listen to me. But Daddy was very mad at me anyway, and he looked like he was going to hit me, which he's not allowed to do, which is why we have the naughty step. He shouted and his face was red, and Mommy was telling him not to shout, which was strange because he'd been shouting too, and just as cross as he was, but then she stopped looking cross and started looking afraid. My daddy was so angry he did not look like himself. I don't think he hit me, but I don't remember. I'm on the naughty step, so I think he must not have done. I have to stay here until Daddy comes and tells me I can leave. Sometimes he looks sad when he comes to tell me that, and says he's sorry. I don't believe he'll do that this time. He was very, very mad. Sometimes another boy comes to sit with me when his daddy's mad with him, which is not very often. Boy sits next to me, and once he sat exactly where I do, but he did not like it there and moved along. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't answer. You're not supposed to talk when you're on the naughty step, so maybe that was it. It made me sad because it would have been nice to talk to someone, but he wouldn't talk, so I just sat there and looked through the family room and at the window where all the different things happen. I think you can change what you see through the bright window in the family room, but I don't know how. So I just watch whatever I can see through it. After a while, they always let the boy off the step, and he goes into the room with his mommy and daddy, and they watch the window together. And soon everyone stops being cross, and they laugh at what they see. Wish I could go in there with them, but I'm not allowed off the naughty step, and so I don't. I cannot leave the step until my daddy says I can. It's been a long time now. Okay, that was a little too short and weird. I want to try one more. I guess she was a ghost, right? So what, the dad killed her? I don't know. You figure it out. This one's called 2 o'clock session. It's a little longer than the last one. Written by Richard Matheson. Trying to run through this bio to see if he's English or not, because that last one was apparently English. I tried to Americanize it halfway through because that was the voice I was using. So it'd be weird if I was saying mummy, so I slurred it into mommy. And cross. No American kid says cross. He was very cross. And I threw in a lot more contractions. Because we're dumb. I don't know. I don't know about Matheson, but I'm just gonna start reading. And we'll find out. Okay? Okay? Okay. The breakthrough came at 2:41. Until that time, Maureen had done little more than repeat the bitter litany against her parents and brother. "I've got nothing to live for," she said then. "Absolutely nothing." Dr. Volker didn't respond, but felt a tremor of excitement in himself. He'd been waiting for this. He gazed at the young woman lying on his office couch. She was staring at the ceiling. What was she thinking, he wondered. He didn't dare speak. He didn't want to break in on those thoughts, whatever they might be. At last, Maureen spoke again. "I guess you didn't hear that," she said. "I heard," Dr. Volker replied. "No reaction then?" she asked, an edge of hostility in her voice. "No sage comment?" "Like what?" he asked. "Oh God, don't start that again. Respond with an answer, not another goddamn question." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you angry." "Well, it did make me angry. It made me..." Her voice broke off with a shuddering throat sound. "You don't care." "Of course I care. What have I ever done to make you think I don't care?" "I said I have nothing to live for." "And?" "What do you mean, and?" "And what does that make you feel like?" The young woman shifted restlessly on the couch, her face distorted by anger. "It makes me feel like shit!" "Is that precise enough for you? God damn it! I feel like shit. I don't want to live." Closer, Volker thought. A shiver of elation laced across his back. He was glad the young woman was turned away from him. He didn't want her to know how he felt. "And?" "Damn it to hell! Is that all you can say?" "Did you hear what you said?" "About what? About having nothing to live for? About wanting to die?" "You didn't use the word die before." "Oh, big deal. I apologize. I said I don't want to live. Anyone else want to assume from that I want to die? Anyone else would, but not you." "Why do you want to die?" Volker winced a little. He shouldn't have said that. Maureen's silence verified his reaction. It became so still in the office that he heard the sound of traffic passing by the boulevard. He cleared his throat, hoping that he hadn't made the mistake and lost the moment. He wanted to speak, but knew that he had to wait. He stared at the young woman on the couch. "Don't leave me now," he thought. "Stay with it, please. It's been such a long time." The young woman sighed wearily and closed her eyes. "Have you nothing more to say?" Her eyes snapped open and she twisted around to glare at him. "If I said what I wanted to say, your hair would turn white." "Maureen." "What?" "My hair is already white." "Yes, it is. You're old and decrepit." "And you're young?" "Young and Young and miserable, young and lost, young and empty, young and cold, without hope. Oh God! I want to die! I want to die! I'm gonna see it! I'm gonna see to it! See to what? God damn it, are you stupid or something? Don't you understand English?
Help me to understand.
His pulse beat and quickened now. He was so close. So close.
Silence again. Oh, dear Lord, have I lost her again, he thought. How many sessions was it going to take? He had to risk advancing.
See to what?
The young woman stared at the ceiling.
See to what, Maureen? Leave me alone.
You're no better than the rest of them. My father, that's her, I'm sorry.
Leave me alone. You're no better than the rest of them. My father, my mother, my brother.
Oh, Christ. Volker clenched his teeth. Not the goddamn litany again.
My father raped me. Did you know that? Did I tell you that? Tell you I was only 7 when it happened? Tell you my mother did nothing about it? My brother laughed at me when I told him. Did I tell you that?
Volker closed his eyes. Only about 1,000 times, he thought. He forced himself to open his eyes.
Maureen, you were on to something before. What do you mean?
Oh no, he thought, chilled. But he couldn't stop now.
You said you wanted to die. You said...
The young woman twitched violently on the couch, her head rolling to the right on the pillow, eyes closed.
No.
Volker drove a fist down on the arm of his chair. One more failure. When the young woman sat up, he handed her a glass of water. Jane Winslow drank it all in one continuous swallow, then handed back the glass.
Anything?
She asked. Oh. The usual. You were right on top of it, but she backs off. She just can't face it. Poor Maureen. Afraid it's gonna be a long, long time before she's free to move on. Are you ready for the next one? She nodded. At 3 o'clock, she lay back on the couch and drew in long, deep breaths. She trembled for a while, then lay still. Arthur. Jane Winslow opened her eyes. How are you today?
How should I be?
Arthur said bitterly.
Dr. Volker rubbed his fingers over his eyes.
Helping them was difficult. My God, how difficult. He had to keep trying, though. He had no choice. So how's life treating you, Arthur? Oh, that was lame. I think it was lame. Well, I'm gonna have to leave you with a lame one, I guess. Well, I got a couple more pages in me. I wish one of those was better. They just weren't. So... Fucktards. Sorry.
We moved it last year, and quite an operation it was, too, Mr. Carlin said as they mounted the stairs. Had to move it by hand, of course. No other way. We insured it against accident with Lloyd's before we even took it out of the case in the drawing room. Only firm that would insure for the sum we had in mind. Spangler said nothing. The man was a fool. Johnson Spangler had learned a long time ago that the only way to talk to a fool was to ignore him. Insured for $250,000, Mr. Carlin resumed when they reached the second-floor landing, his mouth quirked in a half-bitter, half-humorous line. And a pretty penny it cost, too. He was a little man, not quite fat, with rimless glasses and a tan bald head that shone like a varnished volleyball. A suit of armor guarding the mahogany shadows of the second-floor corridor stared at them impassively. It was a long corridor, and Spangler eyed the walls and hangings with a cool professional eye. Samuel Claggart had bought in copious quantities, but he had not bought well. Like so many of the self-made industry emperors of the late 1800s, he had been little more than a pawnshop rooter masquerading in collector's clothing, a connoisseur of canvas monstrosities, trashy novels and poetry collections and expensive cowhide bindings, and atrocious pieces of sculpture, all of which he considered art. Up here the walls were hung, festooned was perhaps a better word, with imitation Moroccan drapes, numberless, and no doubt anonymous, Madonnas holding numberless hallowed babies, while numberless angels flitted hither and thither in the background, grotesque scrolled candelabra, and one monstrous and obscenely ornate chandelier surmounted by a salaciously grinning nymphet. Of course, the old pirate had come up with a few interesting items. The law of averages demanded it, and if Samuel Claggart Memorial Private Museum guided tours on the hour, admission $1 adults, 50 cents children nauseating, was 98% blatant junk. There was always that other 2%, things like the Coombs long rifle over the hearth in the kitchen, the strange little camera obscura in the parlor, and of course, the Delver looking glass was removed from downstairs after a rather unfortunate incident. Mr. Carlin said abruptly, motivated apparently by a ghastly, glaring portrait of no one in particular at the base of the next staircase. There had been others, harsh words, wild statements, but this was an attempt to actually destroy the mirror. The woman, a Miss Sandra Bates, came in with a rock in her pocket. Fortunately, her aim was bad, and she only cracked a corner of the case. The mirror was unharmed. The Bates girl, I had a brother. The Bates girl had a brother. No need to give me the $1 to her, Spangler said quietly. I'm conversing with the history of the Delver glass. Fascinating, isn't it? Carlin cast him an odd, oblique look. There was that English duchess in 1709 and the Pennsylvania rug merchant in 1746, not to mention... I'm conversing with a history, Spangler repeated quietly. It's the workmanship I'm interested in. And then, of course, there's the question of authenticity. Authenticity? Mr. Carlin chuckled, a dry sound as if bones stirred in a cupboard below the stairs. It's been examined by experts, Mr. Spangler. So was the Limley Stradivarius. So true. But no Stradivarius ever had quite the unsettling effect of the Delver glass. Yes, quite. He understood now that there would be no stopping Carlin. He had a mind which was perfectly in tune with the age. Quite. They climbed the third and fourth flights in silence. As they drew closer to the roof of the rambling structure, it became oppressively hot in the dark upper galleries. With the heat came a creeping stench that Spangler knew well. for he had spent all his adult life working in it. A smell of long dead flies and shadowy corners of wet rot and creeping wood lice behind the plaster. The smell of age. It was a smell commonly known only to museums and mausoleums. He imagined much the same smell might arise from the grave of a virginal young girl, 40 years dead. Up here the relics were piled helter-skelter in true junk shop profusion. Mr. Carlin led Spangler through a maze of statuary, frame-splintered portraits, pompous gold-plated bird cages, the dismembered skeleton of an ancient tandem bicycle. He led him to the far wall where the stepladder had been set up beneath a trap door in the ceiling. A dusty padlock hung from the trap. Off to the left, an imitation Adonis stared at them pitilessly with blank, pupilless eyes. One arm was outstretched, and a yellow sign hung on the wrist which read, "Absolutely no admittance." Mr. Carlin produced a key ring from his jacket pocket, selected a key, and mounted the stepladder. He paused on the third rung, his bald head gleaming faintly in the shadows. "I don't like that mirror," he said. "I never did. I'm afraid to look into it. I'm afraid I might look into it one day and see what the rest of them saw." They saw nothing but themselves. Mr. Carlin began to speak, stopped, shook his head, and fumbled above him, craning his neck to fit the key properly into the lock. "Should be replaced," he muttered. "It's damn." The lock sprang suddenly and swung out of the hasp. Mr. Carlin made a fumbling grab for it and almost fell off the ladder. Spangler caught it deftly and looked up at him. He was clinging shakily to the top of the stepladder, face white in the brown semi-darkness. "You're nervous about it, aren't you?" Mr. Carlin said nothing. He seemed paralyzed. "Come down, please, before you fall." Carlin descended the ladder slowly, clinging to each rung like a man tottering over a bottomless chasm. When his feet touched the floor, he began to babble, as if the floor contained some current that had just turned him on, like an electric light. $250,000, he said. $250,000 worth of insurance to take that thing from down there to up here. That goddamn thing. They had to rig a special block and tackle to get it into the gable storeroom up there. And I was hoping, almost praying, that someone's fingers would be slippery, that the rope would be the wrong test, that the thing would fall and be shattered into a million pieces. "Facts," Spangler said. "Facts, Carlin. Not cheap paperback novels, not cheap tabloid stories, or equally cheap horror movies." Jesus, where did I thought? Facts. Number 1. John Delver was an English craftsman of Norman descent who made mirrors in what we call the Elizabethan period of English history. He lived and died uneventfully. No pinnacles scrawled on the floor for the housekeeper to rub out. No sulfur-smelling documents with a splotch of blood on the dotted line. Number 2. His mirrors have become collector's items due principally to fine craftsmanship and to the fact that a form of crystal was used that has a mildly magnifying and distorting effect upon the eye of the beholder. A rather distinctive trademark. Number 3. Only 5 Delvers remain in existence to our present knowledge, 2 of them in America. They are priceless. Number 4. This Delver and one other that was destroyed in the London Blitz have gained a rather spurious reputation due largely to falsehood, exaggeration, and coincidence. Fact number 5, Carlin said, "You're a supercilious bastard, aren't you?" Spangler looked with mild detestation at the blind-eyed Adonis. I gotta stop it there, guys. I'm falling asleep as I'm reading. And 7 pages left. It's not gonna happen.
Thank you for listening. But I tried to push it beyond those two last ones that I wanted to do as last stories. And that one was a bit too long. Have a lovely evening, and don't mind that dead girl at the bottom of the bed.